Greetings, viewers. Welcome to another video by Aziz Draws. This is how many hours it took to make this drawing. Honestly, I could have just made a time-lapse video of the sketching for this drawing because that took a while. But it's okay. I made an 18-minute video. Sit back and enjoy, or just skip the entire thing and look at the end result like people normally do with time lapses. But yeah, no, this sketch took a while. And the reasoning why was because there were many more subjects within my composition than I am used to. So it took some time for me to adjust to the idea that I'm drawing 7 separate characters, and then I have to go ahead and make sure all those characters belong within the composition appropriately. So you can see I went through a variety of different positions for each of the characters, and at some point I was getting closer and closer to what I would have liked from the composition, because even before I touch my tablet, I'm thinking about how I want these characters to look in my head. As the day goes on, when I'm doing other work or just walking, I'll think about, okay, how would Iron Man look like in this drawing? How would Captain America stand next to him? These kind of thoughts run through my head. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I kind of refer to it as letting something bake before I start working on it physically. So as you can see, I'm reaching, the final part or the final phase of my sketch. And so this is kind of where I start going in and making sure, oh, there's my sister drawing. I wanted to make sure I was getting my proportions correct, the anatomy, and making sure that all the characters, looked relatively realistic in terms of their proportions. So you can see I started with Captain America. I'm using Lazy Nezumi to create the ellipses for his shield. I knew that I would have a lot of trouble trying to make his shield look even remotely accurate form-wise, so I decided to use Lazy Nezumi to help me out. It's a really useful tool. I think it's $40 definitely worth for a plugin. But yeah, you can see I'm just going through making sure I got the base anatomy for all these characters correct. See, I'm drawing Thor with Stormbreaker, and as you can see, after I do the base or human base forms, I start going in with the detailing for the costumes. So one thing I wanted to do with this drawing was I didn't want to directly follow the character designs within the film. I wanted to integrate some of the movie character designs with their classic comic book counterparts. So for Captain America, you can see I added, some of the shoulder padding and the chin strap on his helmet. Whereas at the same time, you'll see later when I go into the coloring phase, I decided to give him more of a classic color blocking for his costume. Iron Man, I almost never have the exact same Iron Man. I always draw whatever is suitable to me, whatever I find desirable for the forms of his various components, like his shoulders, biceps, forearms, that kind of thing. So Iron Man is never the same. Thor, you can see he has his long hair here, even though he has Stormbreaker. So that was kind of me mixing in the movie with the comics. This one is pretty cool, Hawkeye, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to acknowledge his Ronin character. And the way I did that was I gave him the costume of Ronin, but to represent Hawkeye, I instead gave him a bow and arrow rather than his sword. And as you'll see later in the color blocking, I decided to change his gold accent, because Ronin has a gold accent for his costume. I replaced it with purple, and I thought it came out with a really cool result. Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet was the one thing that I directly followed the movie's costume, or not costume, but prop design to the T. And that was just because I felt that because of how large the gauntlet is in this composition, it requires a lot of detail. And I figured just following the movie's design probably would be most fitting. So his helmet is a little bit more comic book related than it is movie. But, it is what it is. As you can see, I'm doing like this rough coloring thing going on. And that's just for me to kind of get a feel as to where I want my lighting to be. And this is nowhere near like the final, of course, but this was just a nice way for me to figure out, all right, how is this going to go? Where's the lighting going to go? How is it going to get darker, brighter? You know, the works. So for this phase 2 of my Avengers drawing, I am color blocking, and nothing crazy is really going on here. Just making sure I got all the colors right, getting a hang of the patterning and blocking for the characters. Nothing insane. For Thor here, he's actually pretty close to his color palette for his character design within his films. You can see for, who am I coloring here? Iron Man. For Iron Man, I decided to go for a bright red and gold, along with some dark gray highlights, or not highlights, but accents throughout his suit. You can see as I'm coloring in the gold, I will begin to add these kind of dark lines throughout his suit. And for me, that was just like a personal choice as to how I wanted his suit to look. I'm kind of enjoying the idea of a matte Iron Man, like a matte finish Iron Man. That'd be kind of cool. I want to see that in the film someday. But anyway, Black Widow, she's actually really close to her character design within the comics. Nothing crazy is going on here. I know she has some kind of LED thing going on with her gauntlets. I don't know. I thought that was kind of funny, so I didn't do it. But Captain America here, his character design is similar to that of his costume within the film, but his color palette matches his costumes within the comics a little bit better. You can see here I added more of that white bicep cut off. I gave him a bright red glove. Things that don't happen too often in the films, I decided to do here. His shield doesn't really get affected. There are some, when I go into the details, there's some changes to the shield that make it a little bit more representative of the film, but nothing crazy. Here we have Hawkeye, as I was mentioning earlier, with the purple accent rather than the gold for his Ronin suit. And I decided to unhood him just so that people recognized that it was Hawkeye with his mohawk from the film. I don't know. I thought that was an interesting choice. Here I'm drawing Thanos. I gave it a little bit more warm gold rather than the colder one you would see in the film. Here I'm adding the dust. And yeah, nothing crazy is going on here. Just good old color blocking. All right. Bear with me here. And I do mean bear. This is by far the longest part of this drawing. Just shading. And going back to the whole 23-hour thing, this honestly makes sense when I did the math in my head. If I typically draw characters and it takes me about 2 to 3 hours to shade, but say 4 to 5 hours to draw the whole thing from sketch to shading, and I had to do 6 characters, that's about 24 hours or more. So I think I made good time when I think about it. No, yeah, shading this was treacherous when it came to time. In fact, there was a point where I couldn't work on this anymore because, well, one, I had to take care of my school, my school stuff, and it was just taking so long. And eventually I would stop doing the live streams because I was just like, how many live streams can I upload of this? I didn't want to flood my channel feed with just Avengers drawings. So I figured I'd do one more in the shading phase for this drawing live stream and then just go ahead and finish the rest of it on my own time. Little did I know how much of my own time would this take. And you can see here I kind of doing this thing with the stones where I cause the gauntlet to respond to the lighting of said stones. Here you can see there's some highlight going on from those little, I don't even know what to call them on his fingers, those little rings. There's just, the whole composition of the drawing involves the characters being reflected or reflecting the light of the gauntlet, just to kind of emphasize on the impact and power of said gauntlet. Here we have Hulk. It's kind of cool, this part of the phase where I'm sketching, or not sketching, but shading, because it kind of gives me that old, like, horror movie-esque poster feel. before I add in that other layer of shading. I don't know. I thought it was kind of cool. But that's not what I'm going for here. So, Captain America, he was interesting because I wanted to make him super dark because he's the furthest away from the light and the closest to the camera. So naturally, when you're looking at photos and you have a subject that close to the camera, they tend to get darker if the light is in front of them. So I kind of wanted to mimic that within this drawing. But when I made him darker, it didn't feel right because the overall composition had to become darker. So I didn't want to necessarily do that. Iron Man here, what I decided to do was, even though I'm using this hatching technique, there were times when I realized because of his material, I cannot use the hatching technique because it would eliminate that feeling of it being a metallic material. So I decided to do the hatching for the darker areas, but then when I came in with the second layer, I became more flat in my application, just so that it still looked metallic and shiny. Here I am working on the scales for Captain America. Scales are really, really like therapeutic, honestly, because you're just shading the same thing over and over. Oh, you can see that's my sister's custom star. She wanted to she wanted to paint the star of Captain America's shield a different color. That was a trip. You should watch the live stream for that. But she also does the same thing for Black Widow's hair at some point. I don't know when that kicks in, but here you can see I added that second layer of shading to make everything darker. And you could see briefly a couple seconds ago that it was really dark, and I just didn't want that. Working on Black Widow with the same layer. For the layers, I decided to go for one cold or one cool color multiply layer and then a warm multiply layer. And you can see it in some of the colors that it interacts with. Some are better than others. This is what I discovered when I was doing the Hulk. For the Hulk, you can see it's this weird brown that's popping up because what I decided to do was I wanted to use the warm color multiply layer as the main, or not the main color, but as the overarching shading color. And it's just, it was weird. Like, it didn't feel right. And so at that point, I started thinking to myself, okay, because of these colors interacting with the color blocking of the characters, I'm going to get different results. And at that point, I made the decision to actively think about how I want these colors to interact and plan ahead of it. So you can see I don't know, it's kind of complex to explain, but I basically swapped the hierarchy of shading. Like for Iron Man here, the purple is darker or lighter. So I made it cover more of the body, whereas the blue responds to the red a little bit heavier. So that's going to be in the darker areas of shading. Whereas for the Hulk, it was swapped. I don't know if anything that I'm saying makes any sense whatsoever, but I don't know. That's what I was thinking when I was drawing this. You can see this is what I was referring to earlier with the shading, how I made the darker color hatched in, whereas the secondary color is a sharper, stronger cutoff. It's like a flat tone almost. And that really helps sell the metallic feel of it. Yeah, I mean, it was just a lot of like consideration for what materials I'm trying to color in, where the light source is, how would these various materials interact with said light source. It was just, all these things that you have to think about while you're drawing these things, and doing it 6 times. Thor here was kind of chill. I don't know what I was trying to go for with this cape texture. It looks too fuzzy in hindsight, but I was trying to go for that cloth feel. I should have just honestly went for a cross hatching technique rather than a borderline stipple. That would have sold the material a little bit better because he's further away. He shouldn't really have that much emphasis on the cloth detail. Hulk, I did a little bit of stippling too because of his skin texture. Hawkeye here, more hatching for his hair. And then we got Stormbreaker over here. Hawkeye was probably the second easiest, if not the easiest, other than Black Widow. Black Widow was some complexity because of her hair, Hawkeye here, nothing too crazy was going on. But what I decided to do was, back with the whole Hulk situation where the different multiply layers interacted with colors differently, I utilized that to my advantage for Hawkeye. If you look at Hawkeye's costume and some of the, equipment he's holding and some of the armor plating, it actually looks slightly different in value. And what I did was, for his main suit or his cloth, I decided to make the blue the overarching shadow color, whereas for the plating it was purple. Again, I don't know if anything that I'm saying makes sense, but this was my thought process. I'll be honest with you, when I was doing the Infinity Gauntlet, I just kind of I kind of just checked out. I still did it, but I checked out, really. Like, I didn't put as much emphasis on detail with his, but I thought it was warranted because he is technically in the background, and you don't want to put as much emphasis in the background as you do for your foreground. That's just hierarchy, the balance of things. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've made it this far, all I want to say to you is I appreciate you. And to those who decided to skip to the very end of this video to see the results, I still appreciate you because you were willing to click this video in the first place. But yes, as you can see, I'm adding the final details on Thanos and the rest of this composition. I wanted to fade him away because I wanted him to be part of the background, as well as create this kind of dreamlike effect when you see him, almost as if he's not there. And I did that with both making him faded, as well as adding, these kind of bloom effects on some of the highlights for his gauntlet. So I thought it was a pretty cool result I got from that. You can see I'm also adding more multiply layers and making the characters darker the closer they get to the screen, as I mentioned earlier. And here I am adding the highlights and effects for the gauntlet, specifically the Infinity Stones. And that was pretty cool because I always wanted to do the Jim Starlin streaks for the Infinity Gauntlet, as you can on the comic covers. So that was fun to do. Real easy too. It's just holding the shift key and dragging. But anyway, that is it for this 18-minute video. Thank you all for watching. This was real fun and real tedious to make, but it was cool. See you guys later.